Learn the basics of using Python for web development in this crash course from popular creator Tomi Toko. Tomi will teach you different concepts through a series of short projects.
Hey guys, welcome to this tutorial. So in this tutorial, we're going to be learning Python for web development. So I'm going to be teaching you the major skills you need to know to get started with web development using Python. I'm going to be teaching you stuff like using SQL with Python, using APIs with Python, and some other fun stuff that we need to get started with web development in Python. Now everything that is going to be covered in this video is going to be shown in here right now. So as you can see, we talk about everything from SQL to APIs to web scraping and even virtual environments. And I hope you enjoy this course.
Now I have some free resources like a Django roadmap, a Python data structure cheat sheet, a Django cheat sheet, and plenty more free resources in which I compiled into a PDF, and you can download that PDF for free using the link in the description below.
And before we get straight into the video, if you like more tutorials like this, please don't forget to check out my channel at Code with Tomi, where I teach more on Python and web development in general. So let's get straight into this course. Now we're going to be looking at connecting SQL with Python so we can create and use databases in whatever application that we're trying to build. So for example, let's say we want to build just a demo application that stores like customers' details and we want to save that to an actual database. We can use SQL with Python to make that possible. Now when building a proper web application, if you're using a framework, for example like Django actually uses something called ORM, so you don't actually have to write SQL code to do this, but that's only if you are using like specific frameworks that have those features. But imagine you are using, let's say you are building everything by yourself, the whole server, and you actually need to code in SQL, or you're using a framework that requires you to, code SQL by yourself, then this will come in handy. So this is why I'm adding this part to this whole course. So what we're going to do now, I'm just going to show you how to use SQLite to create database, update the database, get response from it, and all of that stuff. And we're going to be using SQLite. So SQLite allows us to easily create database using SQL. And if you have Python installed on your computer, SQLite comes with it automatically. So when you have Python installed, what you just need to do is to just, first of all, say import SQLite free. Let me make this a little bigger. So now when you say import SQLite 3, what this does is that it's just going to use the SQLite library that comes with Python. So now when we do this, the next thing that I'm just going to do straight is to show you how to create a new database. Now when you're creating a database, it always has the extension .db, just the way Python has the extension .py and other programming languages like JavaScript has .js. When you're creating a database file, it needs to have .db. So before we actually continue coding or start coding, let me tell you more about what this is and what we're going to do. First of all, you need to have basic knowledge of SQL, because what we're actually doing is we are connecting Python and SQL together, as I said, but that means we're going to be running some SQL commands in our Python code. So for example, let's say we want to create a database that is called, like customer database.db. Right, we might need to use for that we might just need to use a Python code to create a database, but to actually create a table in that database, like customer table, then we need to like write the SQL commands that you will use normally. So if you're familiar with SQL, which I suggest you should be, then you understand what I'm saying. Like we're going to run basic command like create table, then the name of the the table we want to create. But to do that, we're going to use SQL to create that, but in our Python code. So without making any confusion, let me just get straight into what I'm talking about. So before we even start creating any table or inserting any data, we need to connect to our database. So as I said, database always has the file .db. So we actually need to create our database file where we're going to be, creating all our tables and all our, data in it. So what I'm going to do is to say SQLite.connect. So what this is going to do, let's just say something like customer.db. So let's say that is the name of the database, right? Of the database file. This can just be like test.database. This can just be like, let's just say this is data.database, right? let's leave it like this. What this is going to do is that it's going to connect to a data.db file in this particular directory. So as you can see, I'm in this directory named Python tuts. If I come in here, this is the directory, and the only file that's there is app.py. So as I said, this is going to try to connect to a database file named data.db. But in that folder, there's no data like that. There's no database file named data.db. What it's going to do is that if there's no database file like that, it's first going to create a database file named data.db before it tries to connect to it. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to store all of this connection into like, so I'm just going to remove this into a variable and name it, let's say, connect equals to this. So once I hit connect equals to this, it's going to try to connect to this. I want to create a table. So for me to create a table, I'm just going to do the basic, the basic syntax that we always use to create a table. And I'm going to say connect.execute, right? So what I want to execute now is a command that I'm going to use to create a table. Now to execute an SQL command, we need to use this triple parenthesis, this triple quote or whatever you call it. So in here, this is where our SQL command is going to go. So what I'm going to do is to say create, and everything has to be in caps, of course, because it's SQL. Create table, and let's just say something like customer. And once we have this customer table created, then I want to have all the parameters that you should have, all the attributes of that table. And let me just give this some spacing and put it right here. So what I'm going to do now is to say I want to give it an ID, a customer ID, and I'm going to say ID. And when you give it the ID, you're going to give it the data type. So I want to say integer, and then I'm going to say primary key. So again, if you're familiar with SQL and relational database in general, you should understand what this primary key means. So if you don't, I'm just going to go through it quickly. So what primary key is basically just represents, this entity or this particular data that we're going to create. So for example, each customer that we're going to create is going to have an ID, and that is the primary key of that particular customer. So that means that if we have the ID of that customer, we can have access to all other details of that customer. So that's just a basic explanation of what primary key is. It's like it gives it the identifier that we need to identify a particular customer. So we want to give it not null. I was saying not null because we want there to be, a value. It needs to have a value. It cannot be null. So we're going to do the same thing. And we're just going to say name. I want to say text. And then we want to say not null. Now you can see the difference. The only difference is that we have the name, which is the name of the, attribute. We have the data type, which is text. But we don't have nothing like primary key because this is not a primary key. We only have one primary key in a particular table. And then we just have not null. So we're going to do the same thing now and say age, and the age should be an integer and also not null. And we put a comma, and I think that should be enough for now. And let's just leave that like that. And then what we can just do is to put after here a column. So we don't need a comma because that's the last one. So after that, we can just put a column to like end that. And I'm just going to bring this back here. So this is a basic SQL command to create a table named customer and give it three, all these values, all these attributes, which is ID, name, and age. So what I'm going to do is to just close the connection after. So let me say connect.close. So what I'm doing is that after I have connected to this and executed this command, I just want to close that connection. So as you can see, what I did here is very basic. I just created this customer table. This is pure SQL command, but then I'm executing it in Python. Now let's run this now. Now if I run this, okay, cool. So as you can see, the database file was created in my default user. So apparently what you need to do is to specify the directory to where you want the database to be created. If you're on a Mac and you just put database.db or whatever the name is .db and you don't specify what it is, what it's just going to do is going to go to the user, in my case, which is Tommy, and it's just going to create database.db, right? Data.db or the file right there. So as you can see, let me bring that here. So that's what it just did. So that makes sense. So what we can do now, as you can see, we executed this table, and now we know that we have a table created like this. But how can we see that we've created a table? Now there are different ways we could, first of all, just insert values into it and then return those values to know that we actually created a table. Or what I do, I downloaded this application called DB Browser for SQLite. Now, once I run this browser, what it's going to do is that it's going to allow me to import an SQLite database in it. So if I say open database, and then I go to Tommy and I say allow, and I say database.db, now you're going to see that in these tables, it actually creates that customer table in that database.db file, and now we have ID, name, and age. So that is good because that is what we need, and now we have the confirmation that we've created this database table in this data.db. Now what we can just do, the next thing we can do is to insert like data into it. So to do this is very easy. We can actually remove this database, right? This execute, because we already created that table. Or what we can just do is to add a line, and we can say something like we want to drop table if exists. So what we want to do is that before this is run, we can say something like, we can have a command and just say connect dot execute, and then we can just execute drop table if exists, and then the table we want to drop is customer. So what this is doing is that before he tries to create the table, he's first going to look if there is any table named customer. Is going to drop it, that means going to remove it or delete it, and then create this table. So this means that every time we run this is deleting the customer table and then creating a new one. We can easily do that, but we can also just remove this and let's say just put it as a comment, because we already know that in this database file there's already a table named customer. So what we can just try to do now is to access that table. So what I'm just going to do, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say connect dot execute, and what I want to do now is to just try to insert values into this customer table. So I'm just going to try to insert just one value. You must write all your commands before closing it, because after closing it you can't access it again. So what I'm just going to do in this execute, I'm going to have my quotes and I'm going to say insert into customer, since we already know that there's a customer database, right? And then what I want to insert in the ID. So I'm just going to copy ID. I want to insert in the name. I want to copy name, and then I want to insert in the age, and I want to copy age. So what I'm doing is I'm inserting into customer in this attribute. I want to insert, I'm just going to have the backward slash, and I'm going to insert these values. Let me just put here and say values. And the values I want to insert for ID, I'm just going to say 1, right? And then for name, I can just do something like Tommy. And then for the age, let me just say something like 99. So I can write all of this. So as you can see, it gives us an error. What we can just do is, because of the spacing, that's why it gives us an error. But since you know what I wrote, I can bring that back. So as you can see, once we try to execute this command, what it's doing, this is also a basic SQL command, is inserting or creating a new data under this customer, under the ID, name, and age, and is giving it the values of 1, Tommy, and 99. So the order in which you put it is how it's going to do it, is how it's going to insert it. So for the ID, is going to take the value of 1, name is going to take the value of Tommy, and age is going to take the value of 99. So now we're going to run this, and so we get an unrecognized token error, which is this right here. So actually we can just get rid of that. It doesn't really make a difference. Yeah, we're just inserting these values into this customer table. So once I run this, I get no response, but I know that this has worked, right? But to actually see that it has worked, what I need to do is to get all the values or all the data in this customer database. So what I can do to do that I can say something like all data, a variable, and I can say connect dot execute, and I want to execute a SQL command. So what I'm just going to do is to say select star from student. So actually this in this case is customer. So once I say select star from customer, and this basically has all the database in this particular data right now, all the data in the database. So what I can just do is say for row in data, so for every single row, I just want to print the row. So once I print the row, this is all data, and I save it. Now let's see what it prints us. So as you can see, if I scroll up right here, it gives us 1, Tommy, and 99. So as you can see, we successfully know that these values were inserted into this customer database. So what I can just do now is to create another, another data in there. I just copied that line and pasted it again, and I can give you a key of 2, and I can say Tim, and I can say 29. Once I save this, right, and then I run this, as you can see, it gives us that we have 1 Tommy and 99, we have 2 Tim and 29. Now this is very good. This is how you can easily use SQL database in your Python project, wherever you're working on. So that is what I'm going to show you for this section of this particular tutorial, or in this tutorial. Now, as you can see, this is just the basics of, SQL with Python. There's still a lot. If you know SQL is basically the same thing. Whatever you want to do, let's say you want to delete a database, or you just want to get a particular data that has a particular ID, what you can just do is to just get with filter with ID. Once you know SQL commands, you basically know how to use this. Just input your SQL command here and execute it, and it's going to work. So that's going to be all for this tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to be talking about using APIs in Python. So if you don't know what an API is, it is an acronym that stands for Application Programming Interface. So what it does is that it's a server that allows you to receive and send data using code. So for example, using Python in this case. So in the most of the time, you actually use an API to basically retrieve data, let's say from another web application, or maybe to even send data and then get a response after. So for example, let's say I'm going to give you an instance of an API. So let's say we have an application that has been built, and you want to access the data in the application. Let's say like you want to access data like the amount of views the application gets, or the amount of customers the application has. The owner of the application can create an API that allows you to access those data if the owner of the application wants. So there are various APIs on the internet, and you can also create your own API. But in this tutorial, we're going to be talking about how to use API. So how to basically get responses and retrieve data from an API. So right here, I have this demo API that I created a while ago. And what it does is that it just has data about, different names and their age. So this says Tim and age 27. This says Tom and age 16. This says Jim and 19. So it just has this data, and that's what it is. There are of course more advanced APIs out there, but for this tutorial, this is what we're going to be using. So I'm going to show you how to access this, this API that we have right here. So to do this, we need a Python library called requests. So you need to go into your terminal and type, just going to open up my terminal right here. So I'm going to run this to open up a terminal. And then delete this, and let's say we want to run pip3 install requests. Once you run this, it's gonna install requests for you. For me, it says requirement already satisfied. That's because I have requests installed already. So once you run that, it's gonna install requests for you, and you're gonna use request to actually send a request to the API that you want to retrieve. So what we're gonna do now is to first import request, and it's with an S, and then what we're just going to do is to send a get request to this particular API. So as you can see, this is built using the Django REST framework. You don't need to know about that for now, but it basically just allows us to, have this good looking interface that has details about the API. So you can see that it uses a get method. What we can do now is to say request dot get, or is in the get method. Let's just close this, and we want to send a request to, so I'm just going to get out of that. You open a bracket and then you have quotes, and in there you're going to send a request to the link of that particular API, or we call it you can say is the API endpoint. That's the URL that has all the details we need. So this is the endpoint that we're sending a request to, and let's store whatever we get as a response in a variable named response. I'm going to say all of this is equals to response. So this is very easy, very straightforward on how to create a request. Then what you can just do now is to just say response dot status code. So once you say response dot status code, let's actually print this. It's going to show us the status code of this, and I'm going to tell you what that means. Right here you can see that it shows 200. So each status code has its meaning. So if we get 200, this means that everything went okay, and then we've gotten a response. If there was any response, we've gotten that response. There is 301, there is 400, there is 401, there is 403, there is 404, which you might have known because it's a popular error code, and I think there's 503 also. So each of these has their meaning. The 301 means that the server is kind of taking you to another endpoint. That's what it means. And for this is 400, not 100. So 400 basically means that we made a bad request. So this means maybe we're not sending the right data that we need, or it just means we made a bad request. And 401, this happens when it requires authentication. It requires you to be authenticated, but you are not authenticated. So that's when we get a 401 error. And 403, it basically doesn't give you access to access this particular API. Basically, it means like you're forbidden and you don't have the right to access that data. That's what it means. And 404 just means that the endpoint or the URL that we're trying to send a request to does not exist. So that's what it just means, or it wasn't found. And 503 means that if the server is not ready to handle your request, so maybe it's getting too much request, or it's just down for that point, so it means it's not ready to handle that request. So that is what all of this mean. But as you can see, we got 200, and as I explained, 200 means that everything is okay and we got the response that we actually need. So once we have that, what I can just do next is to actually print the response that we got. So as you know, this is what is being contained in this particular API. So once we print the response, we should get, that means we print the data of the response, we should get that data right there. So to do this is very easy. What I can just do is to say print, and I'm just going to say response. I'm just going to get out of that dot text. So once I print response dot text and run this, you're going to see that it prints all of this in like a list. So it says name Tim, age 27, that is one data. Name Tom, age 16, that is another data. And as you can see, Tim 27, Tom 16. So that is a basic way of just printing this. So let's say we want to go further. We want to be able to use this data, because right now it just sees it as a string. Let me show you what I mean. So let's say we do something like for res in response dot text, right? And then we just say print res. So because it's a list, you're going to expect that it prints each of these separately, but no, it's not going to do that. See what it's going to print. Let me comment this out. And once I run this, you see that it prints every single character, every single letter separately. Now this is because it sees this as just one string. So it prints everything as one, like every single character separately. But what we want to do is to change this response into a JSON format so we can actually use it as a recognized data type. So for me to do this, I need to import the JSON library that is pre-installed with Python. I'm just going to say import JSON. And once I import JSON, what we need to do is to say, so right here, I'm actually going to get rid of this print. Just going to get rid of that. and I'm gonna say something like response. Now I'm gonna say res equals response.text, right? But I'm gonna say JSON.loads. So what this is doing is that it loads this response, or it loads this text that I get, and it kind of converts it into a JSON format. So now that we know we have this in a JSON format, let me just comment this out for a bit, and I can just print res. And once I print res and run this, if I come here, you can see you don't really see the difference yet, because it still looks similar to how it shows before. But the difference now is that once I try to loop through it, so let me just comment this out, so just remove this, and I can say for data in res, print data. So I'm going to remove this. Now once I'm looping through this res and I run this, you can now see that it doesn't print every single character separately. It prints every data separately. Now this is just a basic way of, getting data or retrieving data from a particular API. So as you can see, what we did was import request and import JSON. Then we sent a request to this particular API endpoint. And then, we're just printing the status code to see if everything went good, if everything was successful. And we got the text from that response, which is the data that we retrieved. And we converted it into a JSON format. And then we looped through all the data, because now it's in a JSON format. It's in a recognizable data type. And then we printed every single data. So this is a basic intro to using APIs in Python. So in this tutorial, we're going to be looking deep into OOP. So OOP stands for Object-Oriented Programming. And in OOP, we're going to be talking more about classes and objects. So whenever you're building web applications, you're going to use something called a framework. So let's say you're building a web app with Python, you have to use a framework to do that for you. And a framework allows you to, skip a lot of setup process and just go straight to the point. Like setting up a server, basically setting up your database from scratch. The framework already does all of that for you. And what you just need to do is to create your project and get going with the main coding. Now, the thing is, most of these Python frameworks used for building web application, they use something called ORM, which is known as Object Relational Mapping. And what this does is that it uses OOP, the concept of object-oriented programming, to create database for you. So for you to be able to use database in your web application, you need to have a strong knowledge of object-oriented programming. So for example, Django, which is the most popular web framework for Python, uses this ORM, which means that using classes and objects, you can easily create a database, even a relational database in your web application. Now, so all this breaks down to classes and objects. So we're going to be looking deeper into that, and we're going to be talking about everything you need to know to have enough skills for you to start building web applications with Python. Now, the first thing we're actually going to talk about is just a basic class. So for us to just have a basic class, of course, we should just say class, and let's just say something like person. This is just a simple class, and we can say the person name is Tommy, and we can say the person age is 12. And what we can just do is to, in here, we can have a simple method saying def. We can have a function, and that function can just be something. Let's just give it a random. Let's just say random, right? And we're just going to give it self. Now what we can do is to just say print something like my name is, and we can just say self dot name. Now we can do the same thing and print my name. At this time we say my age is, and we can just say self.age. So as you can see, that's what this does. Of course, if we run it, nothing is going to show right here. So let's delete this old terminal and run this. Nothing is going to show. That's because we're just creating this class, but we're not actually using, running it or implementing any data with it. So what I can just do now is to just create an object on this class. So what I'm just doing is refreshing on the basic stuff you should already know with Python. So what I'm just going to do now is to say something like demo person. This is just a random data. Now I'm creating an object of this person class. I'm just going to say person. This is how I create an object, and I'm storing it in this variable named demo person. So what I can just do now is to just say, I can print demo person dot name. Now once I print demo person dot name, if I run this, you see that it just prints Tommy. If I print demo person dot age, once I run this, it prints 12. Good, everything is fine. And what I could just do, I could call this function under the class, and I could just say print. No, I could just say demo person dot random. And what it's just gonna do is that it's gonna come into this demo person, is gonna go into the class, and it's gonna look for this function named random, and whatever is being done in this function is what it's gonna do. So once I run this now, again you see that it says my name is Tommy, my age is 12. That is what I told you to do. My name is self.name, which is self.this, and my age, which is this age. So that is, the basics of classes. Now what I want to talk more about is the init method. So what I'm just going to do now is to come back in here, and right here where we have this, I'm going to remove all of this, and I'm going to do def 2 underscore, and I'm going to write init, and I'm going to put 2 underscores. Now I'm going to have self, right? And I'm going to have, the parameters I want it to have. I want it to have name, and I want it to have age. Very basic. So what this is doing is that it allows you to have your own parameters, and like it allows you to, call this particular class outside here. So for example, when I was creating this object, I didn't give it any parameter of my own because there was already a parameter there. But this allows you to create like dynamic parameters, so different parameters. Different objects of this particular person. So I'm going to show you what I mean now. So if I say self.name equals name, I'm going to do the same thing by saying self.age equals age. Once I say self.age equals age and do that, I could also leave this at random, and I could just, leave these two as it is. But the difference here is that when I'm creating this demo person, what I can now do now is to say person, I need to give it the parameters of name and age. So I could say the name is Tommy, and I could say the age is 13. So this is what I could do. If I run this, all of this is going to be exactly the same thing, but now we are giving it the parameters we want outside the class. So if I run this now, you can see it says my name is Tommy, my age is 13. Good, that is what we need. But the good thing to this, to having the init method, is that we can create more than one object of this particular class. For example, I could say demo person, and I could say 2. To say the exact same thing and say person, now I could say team, and let's say 15. Now what I could just do is to change this demo person to demo person 2.age. So I want it to print this demo person 2, and I want it to run the function demo person 2.random. So let's trace this back logically. If we're running this function demo person 2.random, it's going to go into the demo person 2 variable, and then it's going to see the class that is being called, and it's going to go into that class. In that class, it's going to look for the function named random, which is this function, and it's going to do whatever is being done here. So now let's run this and see. As you can see now, it does the same thing, but for the data of demo person 2. So this is how you can basically use the init method, and this is why it is helpful in here. So this is basically the basics of what we need. Of course, there are more to this. There is more to this. Like for example, I could have, let's say, more than one function for defining the data. So what I mean by this, if I come in here, I could have an instance variable. So I could come in here and say, after def init, I could say def, and I could say something like, let's just say school, right? And this school could also take self, and it could just take school. Okay, let's do something like set school, right? So if I say set school, and in here, what I could just say is self dot school, is equals to school. Now I could easily just add school to this here and do the same thing, but what I'm doing now is I'm basically adding an instance variable. So what I could do is to get the color, get the school. So I could just have another function that basically gets. So I could say get school, and I could just say self, and right here I could just return self.school. Now let's try this out. So what I could do now to basically create a new one, right here where I'm giving it these values, this is the required parameters I need. But for me to set a school, let me just get rid of this. What I'm going to do now is say demo person. Then I'm going to call this function, but I'm going to have to give you a parameter, which is school. So demo person dot set school. And then I'm going to give you something like Oxford. So I've set that school. And then what, let me remove two. And then what I could just do is to, let's say, run demo person. Let me run this get school. Demo person dot get school. But because I'm returning a value, I need to print all of this line. So I'll say print demo person dot get school. Now let's see. If I run this, you can now see that it prints Oxford. So everything is working. That is the basic way of doing that. The only difference with what I just did is that I created a whole new function. It's called an instance variable just for this school. Just to set this school, we can create another function to get this school. That is how you can basically do that. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is constructors in Python. So this init right here that I used is a constructor. So it's basically the default constructor, right? So a default constructor is a simple constructor that doesn't take any argument. Now for example, if I say something like, let's say I remove this right here, right? And then I remove all of this, and then I just say self.name is equals Tommy. So this is just a default constructor, and that is the value that it has as a default. Now if I try to run it and print self.name, of course it's going to do that. Or what I could just do, I'm going to get rid of all of this. Actually, I'm just going to get rid of this and this, and I'm going to use this particular function right here, and I'm going to say return name, and then I could just basically print, and in this print function, what I'm going to print is self.name. So what I'm doing right now is I'm showing you an example of a default constructor. So this means that we don't pass any parameter in here, but right here you can see that we have self.name and we just have it as Tommy. So that's just a static data, and that's what it's gonna be. So what I can do now is to just run. So I could remove all of this, and let me just say demo person is equals to an object of person, right? And then if I just say demo person dot return name, and you're just going to see that it's going to return that name that we put in there, which is Tommy. But now let's say I want to have a parameterized constructor. This means I want to have a constructor with parameters. Then I'm going to use parameters right here. So now it takes parameters like name, it takes age, and all of that. So that's basically what we can do with that. It's very easy, it's very straightforward, and as you can see, it doesn't waste any time depending on whatever you want to use it to do. So let me just show you a basic example of this parameterized. To be honest, we've just done it earlier on. What we did when we add name and age passed in here, that is a parameterized constructor. So this is the basics of classes, and these are the basic stuff that you need when you're building web applications with Python. Mostly Django. If we're pointing directly to Django, you just need to know how to create classes, how to create objects, and you just need to know your functions and all of that stuff to be able to filter and get results from your database using this OOP right here. So this is also just an intro to classes and objects. And if you want to, go deeper into it, of course, I'll suggest to take a full course on it. But this is basic, concept around classes and objects, and this is basically what you might need when you're building web applications with Python. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about web scraping. So what web scraping is, it's basically also known as data harvesting or web crawling. So what this means that it allows us to get data from a particular site that is on the web. So if a website is present on the internet, you can scrape data from it. So for example, if I come in here and let's say I just go to my site, codewithtommy.com, I can basically get the data of all the names of every post on this website using web scraping. So there are lots of use cases for web scraping, like for example, search engines uses web scraping to crawl through sites and analyze the content and know what response or what is retrieved whenever someone searches for something. Or you could be building a price comparison site that uses like a bot to fetch the prices on different products on the web. So those are just simple use of web scraping. It could be a lot, but now I'm just going to show you how to actually code a web scraper or build a simple web scraper using Python. So for us to do this, we need two libraries, and these libraries are called requests and beautiful soup. So make sure that you go into your terminal. I'm just going to run this to pop up my terminal. So right here, I'm just going to say pip 3 install request. And this is going to make sure I have requests installed. So it says requirement already satisfied, which means I have it installed. And I'm also going to say pip 3 install bs4. For me to install beautiful soup, I need to install bs4. So once I say that, because I have it installed also, it says requirement already satisfied. I'm just going to close that. And what I can just do is to go ahead and import requests. And because we already know we're going to use beautiful soup, so we're going to say from bs4 import beautiful soup. Now I'm going to show you what these two libraries does. So what we can just do, first of all, just similar to when you're sending a request to an API, that is also how you do this. So we can do something like res and just say request dot get, and in here we're going to put the link that we want to scrape. So in this case, it's codewithtommy.com. Just going to copy that and put it with HTTPS and everything. Now once we have this done, what we can just do is to print res.text. So if I print res.text, you're going to see what it prints for me. So as you can see, it basically prints all the code used to build this website, all the HTML code. So it doesn't show everything because this is VS Code terminal and it just cuts out after a particular word length. So as you can see, it just gives me this HTML code. This means I can get data that is present on this page. So as you can see, that's a very simple way for me to do that. Now, of course, I could just print res and it's going to give me, if I run this, so let's say I run this right here, it's going to give me the response. So response 200 simply means that everything has worked successfully. So now that we know that we have res.text, what that does, as you saw, is that it basically allows us to get all the HTML code present on that website, on that web page. So now, but as you can see, that code wasn't like in a readable format, or it wasn't in a in a format where I could edit some stuff and get data. Now for me to do that, that's when I use soup. So we use this beautiful soup to parse the data. So I could say soup is equals to, I'm going to use beautiful soup, and I'm going to say res.content, right? Or I could say res.text, but content is preferable. And in here, we're going to type html.parser. So we want to parse the HTML of that, request, of that response. So what we can just do, instead of printing res, I could print soup. So if I print soup and I run this, it still prints me the HTML, but if you could see everything well, it's going to print it in a more, good format, or in a more good looking format, and you're going to see the difference. So now that we have that, I could just play around with the data for a bit, and I could do something like soup.title, and this is just going to return to me the title of the page, which is Code with Tommy. Let's run this and see what it returns. As you can see, it returns title Code with Tommy. Now I could just say soup dot title dot name, and this was going to return the name of that particular tag, which is title. I could also say name soup dot title dot parent dot name, and once I run this, it's going to give me head, and this is because the title is under the tag head, so it's basically printing the parent of that title and it's giving me the name. I could get rid of this and run this, and as you see, it gives me everything represented in the head, basically in the head tag. So that is a simple way of doing that, and that's just what we need. Or we could just also go further. So for example, in here where we have soup, I could just say something like s is equals to soup dot find. Now for example, let's say we just want to get this particular title of all the posts. I can right click on this and click on inspect. Now when I click on inspect, it's going to open the HTML code of this, and then I can see all the the tags that it uses. So now I know that this is an h2 tag and it has the class post title. So what I could just do is to say soup.find, find the content that has an h2 tag and it has a class. It has a class of, and in here we can see that the class is post title. Just going to copy that and paste it in there. So this needs an underscore whenever you're doing that in Python. So as you can see, we have that. Now let's say I print s. Let's see what it's going to give us. And I run this. You see that it basically gives us h2 post title, which is the first one, build and publish a VS Code extension. So it just gives us the first one, right? Now if I change this to find underscore all and I run this, you're going to see that it gives me all the titles in this particular page. So as you can see, if you use Django, this is one title, build and publish. The difference between find and find all is that find returns the first one it sees. So the first one it saw was this, but find all returns everything that belongs to that particular class, that particular tag and class. Now that is the difference. That is the difference. So what I could just do now is, I could just print something like, I could say s dot text. So I could say s dot text right here, and if I run this, so it gives us an error and it says that is not. So it says, what do you mean by find? So let's say find and run this. So you can see that we have build. It basically gives us the the title, as you can see here, build and publish a VS Code extension with JavaScript. It gives us the title without the tag, which is good, which is what we want. But as you can see before, when we add find all, we had an error. Now the reason why we had an error is because we're trying to do this for a whole list. What I just need to do is to say for data in S, right? Then I'm just going to print data the text. Now if I run this, you can now see that it prints every single title without the tags or without the HTML code, which is good. Now the reason why we had an error before was because we were trying to do s.text. So we're trying to do all of this, all the old list.text, which is impossible. But if we do every single title, every single title tag in there .text, then it gives us the text that we are looking for. So there's a lot we can do. Like for example, we could still go further and just try to, get let's say under here, we could try to get this A tag, this link, or we could bring this up here and try to get, let's see, the author, or we could try to get whatever we want to get. Let's say we're using a P tag and we're saying cospinet. So let's try this. And let's say we want to say a P tag, right? That has a class post spinet. If we say post spinet, so we're just going to remove all of this and paste post spinet. Nothing is going to change. The only thing that's going to change is the actual data we're getting back. So as you can see, it says in this post, I will show you how to build a VS Code extension, which is what we basically have here. So that is how to get data that you want using Python. It's called web scraping, and it's a very powerful and useful tool whenever you're building not just web applications but programs in general with Python. So I hope you understood what we did in this tutorial. Now I'm going to briefly talk about virtual environments. A virtual environment is used to manage Python packages for different projects. Using a virtual environment, it basically allows you to avoid installing Python packages globally in your computer, which could break the system tools or it could affect other projects. So for example, let's say you're building a new project like a social media application. It is advisable to create a virtual environment just for the application so that every single package you install in that virtual environment belongs to just that particular application. Now let me show you what I mean. First of all, let me show you how to create a virtual environment. Before we create this virtual environment, let me run this command and say pip 3 install Django. So if I try to install this package called Django, you can see that it tells me that requirement already satisfied, which means that I already have Django installed. I'm going to clear this. I'm going to create a new virtual environment now. And to create a virtual environment on a Mac, what you just need to do is say Python 3 m venv, and you're going to say the name of your environment. I can just say new env. Now this is going to create an environment named the new env in whatever folder you're in. Now to be able to use this environment, you have to activate it. To activate it, you're also going to use this command source, and then you're going to say new _env, which is the name of the environment, /bin/activate. Now you're going to see that right here we have this new env, which shows that we are in this new env environment and it has been activated. Now if I try to run pip 3 install Django, you're now going to see that it's going to go ahead to install Django for us. Now the reason why it's installing Django now is basically because Django has not been installed on this particular environment before. We might have Django installed on our computer globally, but that doesn't mean that this environment is going to have it installed. Now this is good so that when we create a new project, we're going to create an environment with it. So that means that for a particular project, all the packages we install, everything we use is going to belong to just that project and that environment. So that is the basic understanding of virtual environments. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up a Flask project. So what I'm going to do is to show you how to install Flask on your computer and then create a new Flask project and run that project. So Flask is a web framework, so it's a Python web framework, and this means that using Flask you can create or build web applications with the Python programming language. So what it does is that it helps you use your Python skills to build web applications. So without wasting any time, let's get straight into this. So what I'm going to do is to actually show you how to install Python first. So to do this, I'm on a Mac and you're going to have to open up your terminal. So I'm in VS Code and I could just open up a new terminal from VS Code. And I'm going to have to say pip 3 install Flask. So to install Flask, we say pip 3 install Flask, and this is going to install Flask on your computer. For me, I have installed, that's why it says requirement already satisfied. If you're on a Windows, open your command prompt and type pip install Flask. You don't need to type pip 3, just type pip. So once we have that installed, then we are good to go. So before we even create like a new project, what I always recommend to do is to create an environment, a virtual environment for your project. So I recommend that every single project should have a different virtual environment, just so you don't mix up libraries and other stuffs with different projects. So to create a virtual environment, we're going to run this command. We're going to say Python 3. Once again, if you're on a Windows, just type Python. You don't need to type Python 3. We're going to say m venv, and let's say my _env. So this is creating a virtual environment named my env. So once I run that, that is going to create the virtual environment named my env. And what we actually want to do is to activate this virtual environment. So we're going to say my _env /bin/activate. But we need to say source. So we're sourcing into this particular folder. Just source that. And as you can see right here, I have the brackets that is saying my env. This means that this virtual environment has been successfully created. Now, once we have our virtual environment created, we actually need to install Flask again. And I'm going to tell you why we're installing this again. Now, we're installing this again because we installed Flask earlier on our computer in general. But for this particular project, we want to install Flask in this virtual environment. Let's say it's like a subset or sub environment from our computer. So if I install Flask and I say pip3 install Flask, you're going to see that it doesn't say requirement already satisfied. It actually goes ahead to download and install everything I need. This is because we're in a new environment that is separate from our computer. So now that we know that we have Flask installed, the next thing that we just want to do is to create a new Flask project. Now I'm going to close this for a bit. And to create a Flask project, all you just need to do is to first create a file. So right here, I just created a file named app.py. And once we create that file, in there, we're going to have to say from Flask, import Flask. So we're using the Flask, library in our Python file. So I had to specify you must create a Python file. So that's why it is app.py. So now that we've imported Flask, what we can now do is to say app equals Flask __. And then what we're going to do is to just say name, right? So what we can just do is to say in this name, we can change it to so right here, we should have name. So in this name, we can change this name to the name of our module, which can be like app, but we're just going to leave that blank for now. And what I'm going to have to do is to say @app.root. I'm going to explain what this does. And we're going to say slash. And then we're going to have to say function. Let's just say hello. And then for this function, we want to return basic HTTP response. We're just going to have like an h2 that says welcome to my web app. And we're going to have to close that h2 tag. So it's a basic HTML code. So what this is doing is saying that when we go to this app and we go to this root, so whenever we have this slash without any root, this means the home page. So it means that whenever we're going to this home page, we want to run this function below it. So what is happening in this function? We're just returning a basic text that says welcome to my web app, but it has these HTML tags. So that's why the text is going to be a little big. And I'm going to show you that in a second. Now that we have all of this set up, the next thing we need to do is to open our terminal again. And in our terminal, we want to, so I'm just going to open a new terminal. In our terminal, what we're going to run, I just came back to that terminal. And what we want to run in here, because we are in that particular environment. So I'm going to say Flask _app is equals to app.py. So specify the file name. And the next thing I'm going to do is to say Flask _env. Now we want to tell Flask that we are still in development. So we specify that as development with a T. So we're telling Flask that we're still in development, so we can use the debugger to catch errors. And now what we can just do is to say Flask run. So as you can see, once we run this, it says this is a development server, it's not in production. So now it tells us our application is running on this particular URL. Now once I copy this URL and come into my browser and paste it in there, you can see that it just gives us this text that says welcome to my web app. So if I make that large a little bit, you can see it perfectly there. So that has successfully run. That is how you can install Flask and create a new project and run it on your computer. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up a Django project. So I'm going to show you how to install Django, create a new project, and then run that project. So without wasting any time, let's get straight into it. So the first thing we want to do is to actually make sure that Django is installed on our computer. But before we do that, since we are creating a new project, let's go ahead and create a new virtual environment for our project. So what I'm going to do is to open a new terminal. And in this terminal, I want to create a virtual environment. So for me to create a virtual environment, I need to run this command. I'm going to say Python 3 m venv, and I'm going to say the virtual environment right here. Let me just say Django env. Now this is going to create a virtual environment named Django env, and it's going to create that in a second. What I'm not going to do is to activate this particular environment. So I'm going to say source Django underscore env slash bin slash activate. So as you can see, Django env is currently activated. Now I'm going to have to make sure that Django is installed in this particular environment. So I'm going to say pip 3 install Django. It's that easy to install Django. So that is 8.1 MB and it should take a couple seconds to install. So as you can see, boom, everything has been installed successfully. Now that we know that everything is installed, just clear that up. What we can now do is to create a new Django project in this particular folder. So to create a new Django project, we're going to have to run Django-admin start project, and we can name the project something like new project. So what we can do is to say ls. If we say ls, we can see that we have a new folder that has been created named new project. Now we want to go into that folder. I'm going to say cd new project. If I say ls again, now you can see that we're in a new folder that has a file named manage.py and a folder named new project. Now whenever we create a new Django project, this is how easy it is to create it. What I'm going to do now is to open up this particular project in VS Code right here. So I'm going to say Command O, and I'm going to go into this and say new project, and I just want to open it up right here. So this is how I create it. Let me just make that a little bit smaller, and let's say yes, I trust. So I can cancel this, and right here, this is everything we have when we create a new Django project. So these are the files that comes with it. Now there's a Django, you can create the Django project, you can create the Django app, but we're not going to go into those details for now. I'm just going to show you how to run this project that you just created. So I'm going to open up a terminal. Let me just create a new one, and let me press Command B to close that up. And since the terminal was removed, we have to activate that particular environment again. We're going to say source Django underscore env slash bin slash activate. So it says there is no file as this. Okay, so what just happened is because we basically opened a new directory, right? That is in this new project directory. So if I come into file and open, now it opened this directory called new project and it's trying to run that particular environment, but it's not in this directory. So what we need to do is to go to that directory that it is in. If I say ls, you can see that it's not in that directory. So because this directory is not there, what we can just do is to open up terminal. And when we open up terminal, this is in the default directory, and we can just run that. So we can say source, and we can say Django underscore env slash bin slash activate. Now you can see that this is activated right here. Now everything is working, but let's actually run the Django project. So to run it, we're going to say python 3 manage.py run server. That's how easy it is. If you are on let's say you are on Windows, you have to run Python. So as you can see, it gave us an error that it can't open manage.py. That is because we are not in the folder where this project is. So note that you want to create your virtual environment in the same folder as your project, so you don't have this directory error. So what we can just do is to cd into new project, and if we press ls, now we can see that we have manage.py. If I try to run that command again, python 3 manage.py run server, everything should be working successfully. So it says that the development server has been started at this particular port or this URL. If I copy this now and I go into my browser and I paste this, you can see that it's just going to give me the default Django page saying that my install worked successfully, congratulations, and it's just saying that this project is now running. Of course, if you want to learn more about Django and go in depth, I would advise you to take a course on Django, and I have a ton on my channel. So to learn more about how to change this page to your own HTML page and build your own web application. But this is just an intro to Django, how to install it, set it up, and then run the project. Now in this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to build a very basic calculator in Django. So it's going to be a basic calculator app where you can input two different numbers and input the operation you want to carry out on those numbers. You can input whether you want to add a number, subtract, divide, or multiply. So we're going to do that right now. The first thing we want to do is to open up the project we created. So we created this new project right here. And what I'm just going to do is to open it up. So to create a new Django project, you just need to run the Django command. And I already done that. I already created this project. So what I'm just going to do is to open up this project that I created in my VS Code. So I'm going to come into VS Code and I'm going to go into files and click on open folder. So in open folder, I'm just going to go to where it is. So this is where it is. And it should open that up for me. So I'm just going to press Command B to bring that open. So as you can see, the project has been opened. Everything is working. So the first thing that we want to do is to, just first of all run this and just make sure everything is working. So I'm going to open up a new terminal and I'm going to say Python 3 manage.py run server. Now this is going to open, it's going to run this application on this particular port. So we're just going to come into our browser and paste that in there. So good, as you can see, Django is successfully working. The installation has worked. Now what I'm just going to do, I'm going to walk you through all the basics of Django by building this app. So I'm going to close this terminal right here. I'm not deleting the terminal, I'm just minimizing it. Now what I'm going to do is to first create a new Django application. So whenever you create a Django project, it is advisable to create an application that you can use in that project. So I'm going to explain the difference between a Django project and a Django application. So a Django project is like, let's think about a Django application as a subset of a particular Django project. So for example, if we have facebook.com, which is like a social network project. So let's say Facebook can be the project, and then let's say the messages section of Facebook can be one app. The marketplace section of Facebook can be another app. So different sections of that particular project can be dealt with by having different apps. So when you have like a very big project, normally you're going to have multiple apps. But for a very basic project like what we're going to build now, we just need one app. So I'm going to show you how to create an app under this Django project. So I'm just going to bring back the terminal. I'm going to bring that back. I'm just going to do is come here and say new terminal. So this is the terminal where we're running our project, but we're just going to run our commands here. So to create an app, I'm going to say Django admin start app, and I can just say my app. So what this does is Django admin start app creates an app, and then my app should be the name of the app you want to create. So if this is for messaging, just say messages. If this is for marketplace, just say marketplace. Whatever app that is, you should do it here. And if you come back into the directory of the particular project, you can see that my app has been created. So there's a folder named my app that has been created. Now this is good, and this is what we want. So now I'm going to show you how we can build this basic project that I'm talking about. So the first thing that we want to do is to come into the project, and in URLs, we're going to come back here to configure something. But before we even come here, the app that we created, let me just close this real quick. In the app, we want to create a new file named urls.py. So I'm just going to click on the app and say urls.py. So this urls.py file is where all the URLs in our project is going to go, or where we're going to, configure all the URLs. Now, what I mean by URLs is, for example, my website codewithtommy.com. So this is the base URL of my website. Let's say I have something like /newsletter. /newsletter this is one URL. Let's say I have another URL that says login. This is another URL. So all of these URLs, all of them are going to be configured in this urls.py file. So for us to start configuring anything, I'm going to show you what you need to do. First of all, you need to say from django.urls import path. So when we say from django.urls import path, we're going to create a new Python list. So I'm just going to get rid of all of this. So what I just did was that I'm using the path module from django.urls that Django gives us. And what I'm just going to do is to create a new list and name it URL patterns. So this list is going to take a list of all the URLs that is going to be in our web application. So I'm going to say path. We use path to create a new URL. And I'm going to have these quotes. And if I leave this quotes blank, this specifies the base URL. So for example, I'm going to use my site again, codewithtommy.com. If I leave it blank, it specifies codewithtommy.com. If I want to have a URL that says login, I'm just going to say login. So this specifies codewithtommy.com/login. So I'm going to leave it blank to specify the home URL. And I'm going to say go to views.home. I'm going to give it a name of home. So what I just did was that I'm saying that whenever a user tries to visit the home URL, go into a views file, right? And I'm going to explain this views file in a bit and run the home function. And then we're just giving this a name of home. So that's the name of this particular URL. Now let me explain what this views file is. If you come back into this app, you're going to see that you have a file named views.py. So this views.py is basically where all the function happens, all the backend of our website happens. So for example, whenever a user comes to the home URL, it's going to go into the views.py file and it's going to look for a function named home. Now whatever we do in that function is what is going to be rendered whenever a user goes to the home URL. So we have to create that function named home, and it's going to take a request. And for now, let's just pass. We're going to come back to this. So what this is doing is that whenever a user comes to the home page, it's going to go into views and look for the function named home. Whatever is being done in home is what's going to be rendered. So we need to fix some stuff. The first thing is that it's not seeing these views. So I need to do from dot import views. So what this is saying is that from the current directory, import the views file. So it's importing views. Now we can use anything from that views file. But now if we come into views, you can see that we're not really rendering anything, we're just passing. So what I'm going to do is to return an HTTP response. So I'm just going to say HTTP response. And right here, I'm just going to say return HTTP response. And I can just give a simple response and say I. So everything should work except one thing. So if I come back in my project and I hit refresh, you're going to see that it still doesn't show us this I that we input here. The reason is because we were configuring everything for our app, but we haven't told our project, which is the main application, where to, what to do when the user comes into the home URL. We just told that to our app. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to come into my project URLs file, and I'm going to say that whenever a user goes to the home URL, go into this app and look for the home URL. Whatever is being done here is what you should do. Now for me to do that, I need to import something called include. So include is going to allow me to do that. And I'm going to say path. I'm going to leave that blank which specifies the home URL. And then I'm going to say include. So when I say include, I'm going to say my app.urls. Now what this is doing is that it's saying that whenever a user goes into the home URL, go into my app.urls and then look for this same URL pattern that is blank, which is this, and include that. So whatever is being done here is what it's going to do right here also. I'm going to save that and let's see if we have any change. So it says site can't be reached. Now let's see, let's bring back our terminal right here. So I'm just going to come here and create a new terminal and come back to that terminal. So it says my app.urls. Okay. So as you can see, what this is saying is that it doesn't see my app.urls, and the reason why it doesn't see my app.urls is because it says it does not appear to have any patterns in it. But okay, so as you can see, it says it does not appear to have any patterns in it. The reason why is because right here where we're specifying URL patterns, there was a typographical error, so it is meant to have patterns, ERNS. So once we have that, as you can see, we don't have any error again. So I'm going to come back in here and hit refresh. Boom, as you can see now, we have I. That is working successfully. So if I come back to views, I'm just going to close this a little bit right here. If I come back to views, in this HTTP response, you can just have a basic HTML tag or HTML code here, and that is going to work successfully. Now, instead of having just this basic HTTP response, I'm going to show you how to use a template file. For example, an HTML file. So an HTML file is just a file that we can allow us to actually design our web page the way we want it. So for me to include this file, I'm going to have to use or configure something named templates. I'm going to walk you through all the steps right now. So what we're going to do at the end is that instead of returning an HTTP response, we're just going to return that HTML file. So I'm going to collapse all of this, and in the root directory, so whenever I say root directory of my Django project, it means the directory that contains the manage.py file. So now in the root directory, I want to create a new folder and I want to name it templates. So in this templates folder, I'm just going to create a new HTML file, and I'm just going to say home.html. Now what I want to do, I'm just going to have something like h2 welcome. So what I want to do is that whenever a user comes into the home page, I want to render this HTML file instead of rendering an HTTP response. For me to do this, I'm going to now use the settings. So I'm going to come into our project and I'm going to look for a file named settings.py. And what I'm going to do is to go all the way to where I see templates, and in templates I'm going to have to configure something in theirs. So I'm going to say base dir /template. So what this is doing is that it's saying whenever we try to get, let's remove this, whenever we try to render, let's say, or we try to use any HTML file, it should go into this template folder. Now let me explain that logically. So what this is saying is that we want to tell Django that any template file we want to get or use is stored in this folder named templates. For me to do that, I have to come into the settings.py file in my project folder. I'm going to scroll down to this templates list, and in there I'm going to look for where I have theirs, and I'm going to specify that in here. So what this is saying is that in the base directory, which is same thing as a root directory, which was what I explained earlier, go into the template folder to look for any template file. So now that that is done, I can just easily come into views, and instead of returning an HTTP response, I could say return render, and I could just easily render. I'm going to say request. This is how we render an HTML file, home.html. Now let's save it, and then let me come here and hit refresh. Boom, you can now see that it says welcome. So this is what we want, and this is working successfully. If I come in here now and let's say I have another h2 and I say hey, if I save this file, that is what is going to be updated in here. Now this is super sick. This is what we want to work. Now I'm going to show you how to create a very basic calculator. So we're just going to have a simple form that takes two different values, and then let's say it's going to add those values and give you the response of those values. So what we're going to do is that I'm going to say we're going to have to create another URL. So let me show you how to create a new URL. So this URL is where the form is going to be, but when we click on submit, the page that that's going to show us the answer or the result of that addition is going to have to be a new URL. so I have to create that URL right here. Just gonna say comma, and let's just say result. That's what I want to name this URL. I want to name it result. So I'm gonna say go into views or result and give it a name of result. So now in views, I'm gonna have to create a new function named result. Take a request, and for now let's pass. And I can quit these settings. So what I want to do now is I want to have a basic HTML form in here. So I'm gonna say form. And in this form, what I'm just going to do is to say input, type, number, and I can just say placeholder, input number 1. I'm going to do the same thing, input, type, number. You're going to have a placeholder and say input number 2. And then I'm going to have a submit button. So I'm just going to say button type submit. So if I save this and I come in here, so it gives us an error, and this is because it says views has no attribute result. So let's save the views file so that can update. That is working. And now if I hit refresh, good. So we have this input number 1, input number 2, but the submit button doesn't show nothing. Actually, what we need to do, let's change this button to input instead of submit. I mean instead of button. Now if I hit refresh, that is working. What I want to do now is I want to send all these values to this particular URL named result. So if you know HTML, you know that we need to specify what is called action, and then in Django you're just going to specify the URL name of that particular URL. So I'm sending it to the result URL. So now if I come back in here and hit refresh, let's say I have 2, I have 3. If I hit submit, it goes to this particular URL, which is good. So this gives us a few errors now. We're going to take care of this in a bit. What we want to do is to come into views now, and we want to get the values that has been sent from this page into this result URL. So to get those values, I'm going to say request dot get, and we need to specify something in here. What we need to specify is the name of each of these input. Now, these inputs, I need to have a name which can stand like as an identification for it. So if I say name and say number 1, in here I can also say name and say number 2. Now the reason why we need this name is so that we can get the value that a user inputs in each of these particular input. So for example, right here when I try to say request.get, what I'm doing is saying get the value of a form that has been submitted to this particular URL, but we don't know what value we want to get. But if we know the name of that particular input, then we can easily just say get the name, get the value of the input with this name. So this stores the value now, and we can just say this is number 1, and we can do the same thing to say number 2 equals request.get, and we can just easily say number 2. So that is what we just need to do. And then we can just say answer equals to number 1 plus number 2. And now we can return render request, and we want to say something like result.html, right? But we don't have any page name result.html, so we need to create that. Let's just copy the name to make it faster. We're going to come into templates, create new file, let's paste that name in. Now in here we have a file that will be loaded whenever a user basically whenever a user tries to load this page. Now let's run what we have and let's see. I'm gonna go back, hit refresh. So let's say we have 3, we have 6, and hit submit. So as you can see, it now takes us to this results page, and if you look well into the URL, you can see that we have number 1 equals 3, number 2 equals 6. So that is the values that has been inserted in each of these, and it also sent those values to this particular page. That is what we want. Now for us to get these values, that is exactly what we did here. We said request.get number 1. So when we say get number 1, it's going to get the value which is 3. When we say get number 2, which is what we did here, it's going to get the value which is 6. And since we have those values, we store them in a variable, and now we're just going to add those two values together, right? But the only thing now is that how can we show this value that we've added together in our HTML in this page right here? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to send this data from my function here into my template view. To do this, I'm going to have a comma in here, and I'm going to say answer. So I'm going to have a simple dictionary and give you a value of answer. So what I'm doing is I'm sending a dictionary to this result.html page. I'm giving it a key of answer, and I'm giving it a value of answer, which is basically this addition that we performed, right? So this is what we want. What I can now do is to save this. If I come into result.html, since we sent this dictionary in here, that means we can access this value in the result.html. But how do I access it? I'm going to come in here, and to access it, I'm just going to have 2 curly braces, and in that curly braces, I'm going to write the name of that particular key. So this is what I'm writing, and it's going to print the answer of that. Let me save this and let's try it out. I'm going to hit refresh. As you can see, it prints 36. So first of all, a lot of errors I'm going to explain. And what I just want to do is to first put this into like an h1 tag just so we can see it clearly. Gonna paste that. Good. So now if I come back here again, you can see it says 36. So let me explain what just happened. So what I did was that I sent this answer into this result.html using a dictionary. So now once I say print answer, which is basically what I'm doing here, for me to say print answer in my template is I need to use these curly braces. So it's going to come in here and look for answer, and the value of answer is this answer variable, and the value of that answer variable is the addition of both of these variables. So that is why we get the addition of 3 and 6. But you might have spotted an error, and the error is that it is just combining the two numbers together. It's not actually performing an arithmetic addition operation on it. So we should have 9 as the answer, not 36. Now let's fix that. The reason why is because when we were adding, we didn't convert these to integers. What we can do is to either convert this to integers here or convert it to integers right here. So Python initially sees this as a normal string because we didn't tell it is an integer, we didn't tell it none of that. So what I can do is to just say int, and everything is going to go into that int wrapper. I'm going to do the same for this integer. Everything is going to go into that integer wrapper. So now we are performing this addition on num1 and num2. As you can see, it now sees it as an integer, which is what you see right here. If I remove that, let's say I do this. Now if I say node2, you can see that the data type is any, it's not integer. So I'm going to bring that back, and now we have integer. Now let's come back in here and test it. So let's say I have 55 and 44. If I hit submit, boom, you now see that I have 99 as the value, which is very good. This is what we want. So as you can see, this is basically working now to this point. You can, make this better. You can add whatever you want. Let's say we want to perform subtraction instead. I can just change this to minus, and if I come back in here, if I just refresh this page, automatically it performs a subtraction operation on these values, which is 55 and 44. I can just go back to, to retest it. So I can do 7 and let's say I do 9. 7 minus 9 is going to give us -2, which is what we have right there. We can do the same thing for multiplication. We can basically do anything that Python supports. Let's save that file. If I come in here and hit refresh, it's doing 7 times 9, which is 63. If I do the same thing for division, save that file. If I hit refresh, it gives us that result in decimal. So this is very good. You could take this further by, let's say, adding another form in this home.html. Let's say like a drop down. So in here, we could just have another form and say, what operation do you want to carry? Do you want to add, do you want to subtract, divide, or multiply? Then depending on whatever the user say, if the user picks addition, subtraction, division, or multiplication, then you can just come in here and do something like if let's say operation is equals to add, then we want to do answer equals to num1 plus num2. If operation equals to minus, we want to do answer equals num1 minus num2. If you get the concept of what I'm trying to say. So that is the basic way, of getting your head around with Django. That was the main purpose of this particular tutorial. It's just to introduce you to this Python web framework for building web applications called Django. Now I hope you are a bit comfortable, or at least you've been introduced to how Django works, and hopefully you can build this project now on your own using Django. And that's gonna be the end of this video, and thank you guys for watching to the end. I hope you found this course useful or this tutorial helpful, and if you did, please don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.